You know, when I look around at all the entrepreneurs who are grinding it out, spending 70 to 80 hours per week growing their business, you have to ask yourself the question, at what cost? Hi, my name's Tim Uchuk, and in this podcast, we're going to be exploring the tools, tactics, and strategies for crushing it and scaling your business without making the ultimate sacrifice of your time and freedom. Hey, what's up, guys? Tim here. Happy Wednesday. Hope you're doing well. It is I love Wednesdays, by the way, because, and this is a little tip, I front load my weeks, Mondays, Tuesdays, with all my recurring meetings. So Mondays, Tuesdays are really hard. They're quite taxing, and I intentionally leave Wednesdays open. So Wednesdays are my gift for my Mondays and Tuesdays. So that's a little tip for structuring your week. So I had some time. I had posted a couple weeks back around, I was asking what your biggest challenges were when it came to delegating. And there were a number of comments. And I thought rather than responding one at a time, I would just jump on here and put together a quick training for you called the 10 Rules for Delegation Mastery. And the principles I want to run through with you, if you follow them, my goal for you is to move you towards this end of the spectrum. And the reason, by the way, why it's important to think in spectrums is a lot of people, there's a good book by Carol Dweck called Growth Mindset. And if you think in terms of like a binary world, like labeling yourself, for example, I'm terrible at delegation, or I'm great at delegation. We don't live in a binary world. It's more useful to think in terms of a spectrum, because myself, I mean, from time to time, I have delegations that don't go very well. But that's typically because I'm not following, these 10 principles we're going to be running through. We want, on the average, for you to be towards the upper end of this spectrum, right? For the most part. And that's my goal in this training. And to not label yourself as a terrible delegator when you make a mistake. We really want to replace the word failing with learning, right? And so when you have a bad delegation, doesn't mean you're a terrible delegator. We just want to learn from that failure and implement some of these rules that I'm going to share with you, so that on the whole, we can move back up to the top end of the spectrum. And one last thing before we jump in, I just want to talk about, number one, the two different types of delegation. And number two, I want to talk about which of those types is going to, if you actually take action, soon, it can literally save you hundreds of hours, within the next week. So number one, just 1 second here. All right, I had to pause. There was someone at the door. Somebody let our chickens out. Anyways, getting back to the two different types. So you have the ad hoc and the recurring. Okay. So the ad hoc is like the one time, hey, can you help me out with this task? Can you help me schedule this appointment? That's like a one and done delegation. Now, the powerful type of delegation is if you have any recurring activities that you do on a daily or a weekly or monthly basis, even if it's a 15-minute or 20-minute activity. It could be, for example, for me, there's daily reporting that I used to do that took me, 15, 20 minutes a day to report numbers from different systems like advertising numbers, and just combining, sales and financial reports into this one spreadsheet. It took about 15, 20 minutes. But if you multiply that, if you have something like that that's recurring, it's low value, you don't really have to do a lot of thinking behind it. It's just a matter of knowing how to do it. If you can offload something like that, and you're doing it again each day, think about that: 20 minutes times 5. So 20 minutes times 5 days a week times 4 times 12. You could be saving yourself, if you grab a couple of those, you're going to easily save yourself a couple hundred hours of your time. Now think about how you can trade up your hours and reallocate from that type of stuff to the high value type of stuff, the move the needle stuff in your business, the strategic stuff, the building and growing your business, and or just having that time off your plate so that you can get back to, the stuff that you really enjoy doing. So the recurring activities, the recurring delegations, if you start to chip away at those, you're going to be seeing some huge gains. So let's jump in to these 10 rules here. And if you understand these principles, if you follow them, again, on average, you're going to be on this end of the spectrum. And that's my goal for you. So let's start with number one, which is transparency through mini contracts. Now, what does this mean? Well, if you've ever had one of those conversations like a drive-by delegation where you're chatting with a team member and you're saying, "Hey, can you help me with this?" and then it's not captured anywhere, right? So we use a tool called Trello, for example, for project management, and so it's got cards which are like digital post-it notes. And when I'm delegating something, I create a card, and I see that as a little contract where it's got the details of what needs to happen, who's doing it, when it should be done by. And that little artifact in and of itself creates a mini contract where, in the absence of that conversation, if you get busy and the team member gets busy, which most of the time it does, there's a much greater chance for it to slip through the cracks. We want to create a mini contract and have it captured. And the benefit, again, is so it doesn't slip through the cracks. Number two is to create clear ownership and one set of eyeballs. So, what I mean by that is if you have more than one team member working on a delegation, you still want to have one clear owner, one set of eyeballs, because in the absence of that, you're going to create an environment where a week from now, they can come back and say, "Oh, I thought that person was going to be doing it." So you want one set of eyeballs. It's okay if more than one person's working on it, but you want one clear quarterback who is responsible to make sure that the team members get together, they have the meetings, whatever needs to happen. One person is owning it. So that's number two. Number three, create context using, and there's a little tip here that I call "so that." And so, quick example of "so that" you really want to give them the ability to have context around what you're delegating, because when questions arise and roadblocks arise, they'll know how to think about it from your perspective. They can put themselves in your shoes because they have the context, they have the purpose behind it. I'll give you a quick example. So my son Harrison is 5, and I got him this Nerf bow and arrow set a couple weeks ago, and I walked him in our backyard, and I thought, okay, so if I just hand this thing to him, those darts are going to go missing because we've got a big like rectangular lot, and I know immediately he's going to shoot them in all different directions. They're going to go into our neighbor's yard, et cetera, et cetera. So the very first thing we did was I said, okay, Harrison, there's a couple of rules here to use these little Nerf arrows. Number one, when you're shooting them, you're going to shoot them in two directions, that direction or that direction. You're not going to shoot them towards the back because it's short. It's going to go over the hedges. You're not going to shoot it in this direction because it's going to go on our roof. So I said, Harrison, you're going to shoot them in two directions so that we don't lose the arrows, right? You don't want to lose them, right? So shoot them this way or that way so that we don't lose them. And I gave him the reason behind that. And when you give someone the purpose and the reason behind what it is you're teaching them or handing off, it gets embedded into their brain because they have the purpose behind it, right? And they have a little bit of context behind it. So you want to give them the why, in other words. Number four, this is a pattern language. I call it DOD. DOD stands for the definition of done. So when you're delegating, you have to understand there are many doors to the same house, meaning that if you hand something off to someone, they can they can do it a different way or several different ways and achieve the same result. And so you essentially want to give them the guardrails so that they can, if these things are true, we're going to arrive at the result, and we're both going to be happy. So you want to give them the freedom to be creative, and take the steps that are necessary from their vantage by giving them the definition of done. So some examples of the definition of done are, different milestones. You could have a budget, for example, if you're looking to hire someone. Let's say you were looking for someone to help you with design work and you delegated that. You would say definition of done means that you have found at least, three top candidates. Make sure that they have a rating score of no less than 4 out of 5 stars. Make sure that they have worked on at least 20 projects, for example. Make sure that definition of done would be our budget, agreed upon budget is less than $500. So what's the success criteria, or the definition of done? What needs to be true, in other words, in order for this result to be achieved? So definition of done, the DOD. That's number four. Number five, eliminate the back and forth by providing the right resources. So think ahead of time, and initially it might take a little bit of time, but understand that it's a move slow to move fast. especially if you're delegating a recurring activity. 100% it's going to take you a little bit more time than doing it yourself. But the point is, if you understand that if I put in the time and it's a recurring activity or a recurring delegation, I'm going to be saving myself hundreds of hours here. It's worth it. So putting together the resources such as like a video, much like I'm shooting right now, a video. By the way, if you're watching this, I'd really love to know who's watching this. So if you can let me know below in the comments, say I'm here, or let me know somehow if you're watching. That would be much appreciated. So the right resources could be anticipating, for example, are they going to need access? So they might need access to passwords to get into accounts if you're delegating something digitally. Giving them the right resources in terms of if like quoting a job, for example, a resource is a calculator. So giving them the calculator so they have the right resources to accomplish what it is that you're wanting. So providing everything they're going to need to prevent that back and forth and the follow up questions. So think through what are the resources they're going to need in order to accomplish this. Number six. Number six, we have. Oops. Let's move this here. And this is just a tip: finding team members that are resourceful. In the long run, I think it's really helpful to have a couple team members who are able to kind of think on their feet, and they're able to I mean, there's kind of two different types of people on the spectrum, right? This is a spectrum, but some people who can write the book, and some people who just need to follow the book. They need the step by step. So when I'm delegating, my VA, for example, my virtual assistant is quite resourceful. I can give her less information and have a great result in return because she's resourceful. She knows how to figure it out. I've worked with many team members in the past who aren't, and they're going to ask so many follow up questions, and because they might be lacking that resourcefulness. So that's kind of a tip, is to find someone who's resourceful, and someone who's not resourceful. I mean, you can be helping them to be more resourceful by giving them the DoD, the definition of done, because it's going to help give them a shortcut where you're kind of and by giving them the context and the DoD, you're kind of taking 80% of that burden and that resourcefulness. You're kind of doing that for them by taking the extra energy to do that. And so if you don't have someone that's super resourceful, just by having these other things in place, the context, the DoD, is going to help them to become more resourceful. And that leads to number 7, which is communicating the type of delegation. So being really clear, you might have a team member who doesn't know, if let's say they're following up, multiple times a day to give you context. Be really clear on the type of delegation in terms of, what, you don't even need to check in with me until this is done. So feel free to just work through all the steps and just get it done. Let me know when it's completed. Or if it's more important and you want to make sure that it's, they're following the steps, be specific and say, would you mind updating me on a daily basis just with where you're at with this? I'd really appreciate it because I want to be in the loop to make sure that we're moving forward on this in the correct way. So could you please just make sure you update me every day or 2 days? So be really clear on how you want to work together on, especially if it's a larger delegation, how you want them to communicate with you. Be very, very clear and articulate the type of delegation it is. And then following the 80% rule. So, and I mean this in two different ways. So 80% rule is, a lot of us are hesitant to delegate because, we can't find somebody who can do it as well as us. But my thinking is, if you're working with someone in the long run, they're going to get better. There is a learning curve. And if somebody can get 80% of your results, in my opinion, in my books, it's good enough. And you have to learn to be comfortable with that, right? Because they're going to get better. When it's done, let's say they get it 80%, you'll have a quick retrospective, and you can reflect on how they can get better. If you can do it over again, what would you do differently? And help them, give them that learning by having that retrospective after the delegation to help them on the next round get to the 90% and eventually, hopefully better than you. The other 80% rule is that everything we talked about here is for you ultimately is to get the 80% of the legwork done by giving them the definition of done, by giving them the why and the context. That's you doing kind of your part, your 80%, so that you can hand it off for them to bring it across the line. And the benefit around this, especially if you're an entrepreneur, most of us hate closing loops, right? We like to get stuff started, but we don't like to close the loop on them. So if you think in terms of your role being just to get that 80% done, hand it off to your loop closers. That's just kind of a mindset rule where when I'm starting something, I know that I'm going to hand off, when I'm creating like a presentation for my team or for my clients, for example, I have a template where I'll just get that 80% done. I'll hand it off and somebody else will make it look pretty and done up with our brand and all that kind of stuff. So the 80% rule is really helpful when it comes to understanding your piece and then their piece, what you're going to be doing. And the 80%, when you've got all of the stuff that we've already covered off, that's kind of your 80% that you want to focus on. Last two here. So number 9, the best way to learn is to teach. So this is an important one when it comes to training your team, when it comes to delegating is, and I'll go back to that Harrison story with the darts. I wanted him to retain our conversation so that he would remember it, in the next day and week. And the best way to learn is to teach. And so after telling him that, I said, Harrison, why do we want to shoot the dart in this direction and this direction? And why do we not want to shoot the dart in this direction and this direction? And he reflected back to me, because we don't want to lose the dart. So he was having to reflect it back to me. And if he wasn't listening to me, he would have said, I don't know. Right. So you have to, you're kind of forcing them to teach you. I'll give you another quick example. So in my 3D printing business, when I've hired people in that business, within the first 2 days of hiring them, I don't teach them all about 3D printing. By the third day, they have to put together a presentation and teach me all about 3D printing, the different technologies, the history, the types of printers we have, how they're used. They have to put together a presentation and teach me, because I know that if I teach them everything, it's not going to be retained as much. So the best way to learn is to teach. And that's something I tap into, just like that Harrison example, where you kind of, you teach them the lesson and then have them reflect it back to you, right? So that they are forced to teach you. And that's going to rapidly help them to learn much, much more quickly. It's going to help them to retain as well, just by quickly reflecting and teaching it back to you. Okay, last trick, and I already touched on this a little bit, but turning 1 into 1,000. So the video that we're using right now, let's say that you were delegating something that you have a hunch you might be delegating more than once in the future. By recording a video or by putting together a set of instructions in such a way that it can be reused multiple times over and over and over again. So for example, when I was delegating, the daily reporting, the 20-minute task, getting it off my plate, I recorded a video so that anybody watching it would know exactly how to do the task. And so I've cloned myself, because nobody needs to ask me that ever again, ever again, because I've got the resource, I've got the video, I've got the training, it's done. And I've cloned myself. I've turned 1 into 1,000, because that can be done over and over and over and over again. And if one team member happens to leave for whatever reason, they're on vacation, I don't have to train someone, because I already have the resource. It's there. I've cloned myself. And so eventually, if you can do this for all of the stuff that's recurring, that's on your plate, you are turning 1 into 1,000. You're cloning yourself by thinking in these terms. Okay, so that's the 10. I just want to share one last piece with you in terms of how to set up let's say that you're using a card, and we use Trello. It doesn't really matter. You can use paper for that matter. The important thing is to have the elements in place and to be aware. And this kind of covers off and puts a bow on what we had just talked about here. We're missing the number here. So, okay. If this was a Trello card, if this was a piece of paper, make sure that it has all of these elements on it. There's 6 elements here. Number one, it should have a title. The title should be clear. Whoever is watching whoever's looking at it should have context in terms of what it is and what it's about, right? So if it's vague, they're not going to have clarity around what it is. So give it a good title in terms of what the delegation is. And a little tip is to use the so that we talked about. Number two, ownership, one set of eyeballs. And if you can assign them to the task, even better. And number three, having a clear due date. So a clear expectation of when you want it done. Make sure it's realistic. Where are we here? I think we missed the 3. Let's just go through. Oh, there it is. And number 4, giving it a purpose. So they have the context behind it. Number 5, giving a list of the resources. So if they need passwords, if they need access to any other resources, even having an instructional video like the one that you're watching is very helpful when it comes to delegating, especially if you're working remotely. And finally, the definition of done, which we talked about. So if there's a checklist, you can say, here's the definition of done. If these things are true, this thing is a success. So again, those are just some tips. If you have these things in place, you're going to be set up to move on the average towards the top end of the spectrum. And on the average, you are going to be a delegation master. So I hope that's helpful. Again, let me know in the comments below what your biggest takeaways were, what your biggest insights were. And please don't just there's a difference between consumption and production. So don't just consume this stuff. I want you to go out there and actually use it and go into the production side. So we've done the learning. Now is the time to get out there, use what we talked about here today. Hope it was useful, and I will talk to you guys in the next video. Hey, Tim Uchuk here, and real quick, if you enjoyed this podcast episode, if you could take a couple quick seconds to give it a rating, it would be very much appreciated. And secondly, if you're looking for more tools and strategies on how you can crush it in life and business, just head on over to bookwithtim.com, where I've put together a free case study which shows you how to unlock unprecedented freedom today by using the 2 power levers. Just head on over to bookwithtim.com. Until next time, wishing you success and freedom in your business. Cheers.